Going through hierarchical structures. What is such a structure? It can be seen as a graph with a main node and some children nodes. For example, we have a hierarchical structure in the employees table where we have the employee ID and then the name and then the manager. You can see that the manager is also an employee ID, so every manager ID can be found in the employee ID column. So the highest manager is the one that does not have a manager, so it's the employee with ID 103 and with no manager. Then the managers from the second level are the ones that have Mr. Miller as manager, meaning Williams and Garcia. They have as manager the employee ID 103, and then we have the others that have manager 104 and 101. These are the hierarchies. How do we retrieve this information in an order? Well, we can do it in three ways. First of them being from top to bottom by selecting the employee ID, the name and the manager, and then the level, meaning the first level, the second level, and so on, from table employees. And we connect by prior of employee ID equals the manager. And then start with the manager from the first level being the employee ID with 104. The result is this one, where the employees are displayed from top to bottom, meaning from the level 1 manager, then the level 2 manager with its employees, then the second level 2 manager with its employees, and so on. The second way to go through this table is from bottom up, where we select the same data, but we use the prior keyword before the manager ID, so that we display the employees from bottom up. We start with the name White, being the employee from the last level, and then these employees will be displayed. The employee from level 3 with its manager, and then the manager of the employee from the level 2. The last way to go through this table is from the middle, meaning we can display the employees from top to bottom or from bottom up, but from a different level. So we can use the employee ID with ID 104, which is on the level 2, and then it will display not from the start but from somewhere in the middle. Employee Garcia being on level 2, and then the employees that have Garcia as manager. The next video is a bonus one where we will talk about SQL injections. And the last topic that we're going to talk about is SQL injections. What is an SQL injection? Well, it's a technique that could destroy a database. It's a piece of SQL code that can be run usually when you ask a user for his credentials and he inputs an SQL statement instead of his username and password. So when you ask for the username and password, the app will receive a string for username and a string for password. So if we as database developers or the web developers don't take measures in order to prevent inputting SQL statements, then our database might be compromised. How can it be compromised? Well, for example, the application might get the string from the username field and the password from the password field, and use a select query in order to check if the user is in our database and if the password is the correct one. How do we do that? By creating a select statement from the users table, where the name is the string from the input and the password is the string from the password field. And if the user will use this text for the username and this text for the password, then we will select from the users table where the name is empty or an empty string is equal to an empty string, and where the password is empty or an empty string is equal to an empty string. What will this select return? Well, we don't have empty usernames in the users table, and for sure we don't have empty passwords. But here is an OR keyword that compares an empty string to an empty string. So this where condition will always be true, and this AND condition will always be true. So the database will return all the users from the users table, and our users that gave us the SQL injection will have access to all of our users. A second example might be when an application is asking for your username and the code is taking that username to a variable and then uses an SQL query to select that username from the database by selecting all from table users where user ID equals to the variable that we took from the application. And let's say the user, instead of inputting the username, he inputs the text 105 semicolon drop table users. Then our select statement will look like this, where user ID equals to this. So our code will return from the users table the users that have the user ID 105, and then also execute the drop table users. So by doing that, our user was able to drop our table of users, and now we don't have any information on the existing users. How can we prevent such things? Well, we can use some filters. The web developers can filter the data that can be inserted into the fields. We can also use variables that have constraints on them, but the most common answer is using an encryption. So we won't store in the database the password. We will store an encrypted password, and when the user inputs his password here, we will encrypt the string and compare our encrypted password with this encrypted string. If they are equal, we will return the user credentials. If not, then we won't do anything.